Okay, we'll get started. So I suppose this presentation is really just to kind of give everybody an overview of what carbon neutrality roadmaps are and, give you some advice on how to go about doing them or what the kind of framework people are following at the moment. I know they're becoming more of a hot topic as ESG reporting becomes more of a thing, but they've been actually around for a while now, probably 2 or 3 years now. A lot of people have been doing them and stuff. And the shift has kind of come from people were doing energy efficiency projects, and then carbon neutrality became more of an important thing to try and get further and hit more of your goals and that kind of stuff. In general, a lot of countries now have set net zero emissions targets for 2050, especially in the EU. Ireland is one of them, and we have a 50% reduction in emissions by the end of this decade, and that's it. We've signed a legal thing for that now, so there's an act that makes it, we have to make a framework for it and addressing climate change and all that kind of stuff. Climate neutrality economy is a word that comes up a lot of the time when you're talking about carbon neutrality, because they're kind of stemming from the same thing. But climate neutral means in a sustainable economy where greenhouse gas emissions are balanced against what you use, or else they're like offset in some way. So that's kind of where this whole thing of neutral comes from. But a big thing for why, particularly in Ireland or in the EU, the target being set for 2050 for a lot of countries is, the big driver, and why ESG reporting became such a big thing and all that kind of stuff. Okay, so carbon neutrality itself, it depends on what you're talking about. So realistically, most people on this call are probably here about businesses. The goal for a business to become carbon neutral is to reduce their own emissions as much as possible, and then offset whatever the remaining carbon that they can't remove is, or whatever other emissions they have. So in realistic terms, for a company to become carbon neutral, they got to get rid of as much of the fossil fuels as possible, and then put in as much renewables for the electricity as possible. And then they usually tend to go on either a purchase plan for renewable energy from their provider, or they offset it with some other kind of means. Planting trees was popular for a while. People are going off that now because of the reporting and tracking of it is kind of becoming hard. But there's loads of other ways too. You can do sustainable projects for other communities and all that kind of stuff. There's a lot of different things going on. For a country or region to become carbon neutral, their goal is to get net zero emissions, particularly when you're talking about fossil fuels like gas and stuff. And this would include like all sectors: transport, industry, electrical generation, all that kind of stuff. And anything that they're not achieving, that they offset it in some way by, supporting other projects and things. That's kind of the general gist when you're talking about carbon neutrality. But when, again, coming to businesses, you're really on about trying to reduce your emissions. So one thing to be aware of for ESG reporting or carbon neutrality is the scope emissions. So scope 1 are the direct emissions that you have. It includes things like any fossil fuels used directly on site or energy sources directly on site, and anything like company vehicles and stuff like that. They all fit in scope 1. They're usually the biggest producers of a carbon that you can impact as a business, because you can either remove the majority of them or set up a plan to like phase out certain things, So that's scope 1. Scope 2 are indirect ones, but they're still energy related. Typically, they're usually like your purchased electricity. And then in some countries, they purchase steam from centralized power plants, they purchase district hot water, all that kind of thing. So scope 2 is about making that as sustainable as possible or renewable. And then scope 3 are the real indirect stuff, and they could be everything from your supply chain in to like stuff that you're putting out, like you're selling your products or your waste or all that kind of stuff. And in general, the whole game is to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, but CO2 is the one everybody focuses on because it's probably the easiest to understand. Refrigeration and stuff, HFCs were phased out a while ago, and they're getting refrigeration gases now have their own metrics for reducing how much greenhouse gas emissions they're worked. But in general, if you're a company, you want to get rid of as much scope 1 as you can and get as much of scope 2 from renewables. That's the kind of general gist to get to carbon neutral, So, okay. So the process. So in general, you're going to try and figure out what you're using first. So you're going to do some kind of audit or carbon neutrality roadmap or measure what you're using in some way. And then you're going to come up with a plan to reduce that. Whatever you can't reduce it by, you're going to have to offset. You're going to put in place whatever reporting scheme you want, depending on if you're doing ESG reporting or if you're reporting to a body that certifies for carbon neutrality or whatever. And then you go set up some kind of continual improvement. So you're always trying to reduce, because the real savings in terms of money comes in this reduction section. The offsetting can be expensive depending on what scheme you're going with and stuff. You're usually paying a premium on your electricity to go on the purchase plans, or you're planting trees and that costs money too. And then verification, obviously if you go through all this, you want to be certified in something for your customers and stuff, and try and build up, more of a reputation for being carbon neutral or sustainable. So that's kind of the general overview of the process. I'm going to go through it again in a sec, but some of the the main strategies are: get rid of everything energy efficiency wise that you can. So anything that's on site that you can optimize, that's protocol 1, because it's usually the lower cost solutions, and you just like putting LEDs, change out any inefficient motors, optimize systems like boilers, or optimize systems that are using hot water, steam. Putting heat pumps is a popular one, all that kind of stuff. So that's all really at the facility level. That's your first protocol. Affect what you can first of all, and that's usually the most cost effective thing. Then when you can't get any more of that, your next protocol, or you can start thinking about this while you're doing this, is get renewables. Put as much as you can on site. The reason why you want to have it on your own site is it gives you independence from anyone else fluctuating the price on you. So solar is very popular at the moment. Wind is also quite popular. Biomass is another one. Biomass doesn't get you down to zero, but for high temp solutions, biomass and biogas are also there. And then there's loads of other renewables, but they're usually the main ones. If you're near a river, you can use hydro, etc. Yeah. And then when you've got all that in, you got to offset something. Usually most businesses won't be able to get to zero, depending on usually the footprint of the building, because if you have a bigger enough footprint with a large enough roof, you can usually use solar to offset the majority, or if you're near a location where you can use a field or something like that, and you've switched all your heat sources over to heat pump, and then we can start using solar to offset it, and that's the way you get you down to zero. But a lot of businesses can't do that, so you're going to have to offset something in the end. And the most common way is to go on a green purchase plan. And then, the other most common way is things like projects in third world countries, or doing greenhouse gas emissions reductions by, clean seas programs or planting trees or whatever. Okay. So that's kind of the strategy that you're going for. Fix what you can, renewables, offset. Yeah. Other kind of strategies that are starting to come out of this is, you've got low carbon in transport is a big one. Obviously promoting, using not using cars as much, or going to electric is a good way of reducing carbon emissions and stuff. Carbon pricing, this is trading schemes and stuff, usually for much bigger businesses and stuff would be on an emissions trading scheme of some sort. You can obviously trade with other facilities that have excess of carbon reductions, but there is a whole thing about how accountable is this and all that at the moment. And then you've got, just general education and awareness and stuff like that is another thing you can add to your strategies. Financial and operational benefits, you obviously got cost savings, especially in that reduction phase is where you'll get most of your cost savings, because you'll usually optimize processes on site and get both energy savings, maintenance savings, and other ops savings. And then improve your reputation with your customers is another benefit. Compliance and regulations, obviously in the countries that are setting the targets, there's more and more regulations, but you're going to have to meet some of them, so you might as well get a head start on a lot of them. Improve competitiveness, or people in your space who aren't doing sustainability stuff. Obviously on the market, it's very, it's valued by customers to be a sustainable company or to be an environmentally friendly company, especially it's becoming more and more valued as more information comes out about, oh, this is sustainable and this isn't, and this is good for the climate, and this, risk management, obviously you've got significant risks for industries such as, extreme weather or other things going on. But if we can reduce the amount of overall carbon or greenhouse gas emissions in the world, we're hoping that the likelihood of climate fluctuation and stuff goes down. Innovation and technology development, that's all around generating new technologies and stuff to reduce this carbon emissions and stuff. So these are some of the big players that have committed to going, carbon neutral over the next couple of years: Microsoft, Allianz, Coca-Cola, etc. There's loads more. The slide could have been as long as your finger, but they're just some examples. So what we tend to do if we're doing a carbon neutrality roadmap for a client is we tend to map it out like this. This is mainly for a company that doesn't have that much capex initially and they want to be brought through a step-by-step process. But some companies are already halfway through this, like might have ISO already in place, and they may not need all the steps, and if they have loads of capital, they might want to do their high cost ones first or whatever. But in general, you set up some kind of baseline assessment, a stage where you're trying to establish what are the opportunities, what's the plan you want to go for, establish some objectives and energy performance indicators, and then after that, okay, now you need to decide what you're going to do. So usually some design phase involved. Apply for any grants and funding. The reason why we tend to put this after this is because if you've this done, you're more likely to get your grants and funding, because you need things like quotes for stuff and all that kind of stuff. And then, to get some easy or early wins, you want to implement your low cost and medium cost opportunities as soon as possible, because they're usually easier to implement and you get some money saved up. And then you plan out, okay, what are my procedures around reporting? And then normally people will do their high cost opportunities once they've got them in place. And then it's left over, they'll offset with a purchase plan or a neutrality agreement with a reforestation company or something like that. And then you get certified for being carbon neutral when you got all this. Does that make sense? So that's the main kind of roadmap that we would follow. What that looks like in technical terms is you come up with a list of a bunch of opportunities. You might map them out like this and go put your year, put your total, or this is in kilowatts, but you could do tons of CO2 as well, total kilowatts, and then your reductions each year. So you're going to take them off of the next year. You're going to line up what solutions you want to do each year. And then at the end, you're going to have some amount that you couldn't offset or you couldn't save on that you're going to have to offset. So then you go into a power purchase agreement or whatever. This is what it kind of looks like technically. You come up with some list in general. It doesn't have to be sideways. It could be down the way as well. But then you're going to end up having to put them in a table year by year. And that's how you figure out your carbon neutrality roadmap. And then you're going to do some graphs like this, which is like, okay, we're going to get rid of gas off the site for this particular site. They're going to get rid of gas for the CHP initially and the electric gas for heating. They're putting in heat pumps here. That's why there's a big drop there. And then, you'd up your renewables as much as possible. These ones look like they only had a small amount of solar. You see the kind of dark blue line down here. But you want that to be as big as possible to reduce how much, renewable energy you're having to purchase through a purchase plan. So these ones are purchasing through the grid. And then, you can graph it in waterfall diagrams or whatever. But in general, your biggest drop for most sites is going to be whenever you're removing the heat sources and stuff, because everything else tends to be electric anyway. So putting in like a heat pump or whatever is usually where you get your big drop in emissions and stuff. Other ones would be obviously putting in renewables and stuff. Another way of displaying that is in terms of carbon emissions. So you draw your graph out like this. Okay, we're dropping. This looks like it's from a different report, but anyway, dropping. And this again is another heat pump that's going in. And then, they've got this amount that they're going to need to offset with something else, and then the whole game is to try and get your tons of CO2 down to zero. And that's how you're carbon neutral. And that could be from you purchasing renewables from the grid or purchase or actually having renewables on your own site or offsetting it. Yeah. So that's kind of what you're looking for, particularly if you're doing up a report about a carbon neutrality roadmap. Is this diagram that is what they're looking for. How are you getting to zero, or how close are you getting to zero? The allowance for most certification processes is that you get 90% of your energy coming from renewable resources or renewable sources. And then, after that, there's some lenience at the moment, but that probably changes more and more people get to carbon neutral, but that's kind of the game for that. And then I suppose where we can help you is if you do need help with a carbon neutrality roadmap or any other energy stuff, you can get in contact with us and we can give you a quote for doing it and all that kind of stuff. But also, if any just have questions, you can ping them over to me. We don't mind answering questions initially because we know everybody is kind of only starting out in these journeys with the carbon neutrality or the ESG reporting, and people have different questions based on whatever one they're trying to go down and stuff, and our goal then as a company is to try and support people across multiple sites or across their business into the future, and just be like an advisory thing or implement actual projects for you if you're in the need for turnkey projects or turnkey carbon neutrality roadmaps or whatever. And if anybody needs any more info, you can contact me here. I'll probably just take some questions now. If anybody's got any, I can answer them. Yeah. If you don't, it's okay too.
Hi, Dylan. I just have a quick question regarding the offsets. You mentioned that, because I know the SEA has a grant as well that you can put solar panels on, like on your own building. But does that count as offsetting? Because I know there's an issue, say,
no.
Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
I'll go up here and show you. So solar in general, right? Really what you're doing is you're reducing the amount of scope 2 emissions that you're purchasing from the grid. Okay. So then what happens is your generation becomes direct, and because it's renewable, they say there's no carbon emissions with it, right? So if you got solar on your own building, all that energy is zero carbon for the time being, in the current reporting models. Yeah. Yes. So it just reduces your overall total. That's why the advice is reduce your energy as much as possible before putting in renewables, then install as many renewables as you can. And then that brings your total number down that you're going to have to offset with a purchase plan or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah, because so we already purchased 100% renewable, but because of, the grid itself isn't, this would end up reducing the location-based scope 2 emissions, would it, if you have the solar on your own roof?
Yeah. So for instance, let's say you have a business and you install the solar and you're already on the green purchase plan. The big thing you're hitting is your amount of money that you're spending, because you're going to put solar in, you're going to get a grant. In Ireland at the moment, there's a 20% grant for most big projects, right? So you install the solar, you get your 20% grant, and then solar will pay back, depending on the size. Let's say it's a 6 kilowatt peak array, it'll pay back about 2K every year, which means you have a 4-year payback. And it's the same, as you get bigger, it'll still be around a 4-year payback. It's just you're putting more panels and you usually get a better price the more you're putting in, but somewhere between kind of 3 to 5 years, but 4 years is kind of common at the moment, Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Anybody else? Okay. So if no one's got a question, I'm going to upload this presentation. It's been recorded and we put it on YouTube and whatever. So if anybody needs to look back over it again, you can, and we'll send out an email to everyone who attended. So you can look back at it whenever you want. And if you ever need help, just reach out to us and we'll give you whatever advice we can, or we'll support you with doing up a roadmap or doing up energy audits or whatever you need. Okay. Does that make sense? Everyone okay?
All right. Thanks very much.
No worries. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.